right, I am really excited to have Jeff share today. I'm going to pray for you, Jeff. We are honestly recognizing that there's a connection between our emotions and our spirit and spiritual health and Jesus. So we're finding Jesus in our emotions, and that is kind of a new thought for a lot of people, but it's absolutely biblical. So Father, bless Jeff, bless those watching. I pray, Lord, that you continue to lay foundations of kingdom life in our midst, and use Jeff here to keep building the ancient foundations of how the kingdom is advanced relationally. We bless you, Jeff, and we say, blessed are you that comes in the name of the Lord. In Jesus' name.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Ryan, for a great time of worship, and wherever you are, took Jordan there. But that was great. And Victoria, it really is encouraging to all of us to see your faith and obedience doing this thing. So thanks for sharing that gift with us. So I am going to be Tim's been doing a series on finding Jesus in, and I'm going to continue that by finding Jesus in our emotions. And I'm going to, I have to get my technology in order. Okay. So when Jesus was starting the Sermon on the Mount, the very first thing that's recorded in Matthew 5 is this statement: "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And in our culture, we're not about being poor, we're about, being rich and powerful and strong. So this opening statement about what the kingdom of God is like and how to get it. So Jesus starts off with this: if you want the kingdom of God, you're blessed if you're poor, because if you're poor, it opens the door to bring the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, down into this earth. But that's so counterintuitive. And so really, today's message is primarily about unpacking this paradox, that the key to experiencing the kingdom of heaven is being poor. Like, what in the world does that mean? And I'm not saying what I'm going to share is the answer, but it's maybe one aspect. So I want to start a little bit with talking about my journey. So if you've been around for a little while, we've talked about attachment styles, having a secure attachment, and if there's not a secure attachment, there's different kinds, but mine is dismissive. And what happens with the dismissive, it's not something that I just decided one day I was going to be like a dismissive, but it was that my parents were emotionally unavailable and unengaged, and God creates in each of us this really strong desire to be attached. That's why when you look at a 1-year-old baby and they're smiling at you, what they're doing is they're saying, will you attach to me? Here's some bait, my smile, and what I want to know is, do you want to be with me? That's the question they're asking, and that's the question they need to answer. And so I didn't get that, and so the substitute that I concluded I needed to have was to get my value, not because of just somebody wanted to be with me for who I was, but I decided I need to earn that. So basically, I concluded my value comes from performing, from achieving, and not my value from who God says I was. So I saw relationships as basically, they're good, but they're useful for getting things done. Okay, so there's a difference between starting with relationships, like that's the main thing, and while well, we're having relationships, let's do some things, versus the main thing is getting things done, and we'll basically use people to do that. And I wouldn't say that was my thought about using people, but that's how it worked out. Okay, so, and when I became a Christian, then I transferred that to like, well, I'll learn my value for working from God. And so that idea doesn't really work so well for a marriage. And especially when you marry somebody who's relationships are really important. I mean, that's what attracted me to Sharon. I go, wow, you're really good at relationships. I'm not. So, I'd like to marry you. Maybe you can help me and compliment me. But that didn't work so well for Sharon. So when I realized that I had this issue, really I had two choices. One is, hey, this is how I am, deal with it. That's one option. So Friday night, Sarah and I watched this movie by Clint Eastwood from about 10 years ago called The Trouble with the Curveball. And there's this scene in there where his estranged daughter has breakfast with him, and she starts bringing up trauma that she's experienced because of what he's abandoned her. And so his response was, why do we need to talk about this? I don't want to talk about this. Waitress, could you bring the check? And so Clint Eastwood is like, the epitome of a man's man, right? Gets things done. But when confronted with, hey, how about we work out some emotional rupture here, which is kind of this plot of subplot of what's going on in the movie, he didn't want to go there. And basically, he's just saying, I am what I am, so take it or leave it. And funny, that's kind of what my dad said to my mom. That's what Sharon's dad said to his wife. It's just like, this is how it is. So take it or leave it. So the other response is to say, okay, God, I'm going to cooperate with you even if I'm in my 50s or I'm in my 60s, that I'm going to go on this journey of healing with you. And it's difficult because when you're wired some way and you're an adult and you start changing in this stuff, it isn't easy. But I would say this is part of my biggest part of my destiny is learning to have God change me in an area that's really hard. So, my friend Andrew Arnold, I was out walking with him one morning, he was walking his dog, and he's saying, there's this really good book called The Voice of the Heart by Chip Dodd, and you should read it. And I thought to myself, Andrew, I can't tell you how many books is on my to-read list, so yeah, that's fine and everything. I doubt I'll ever get to it. And then I heard him give his 2 messages on the 8 emotions from this book, and I just knew, okay, I need to buy that book. So that was on a Sunday. The thing about technology is Monday I downloaded it on Audible and I started listening to it. And on Tuesday I was at the gym. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm going to quote quite a bit from this book, some highlights of what I learned from this book. And so here's the first quote. Feelings speak the language of the heart. They are primary to our human experience and awaken us to our hearts. We use feelings to communicate our God-given hunger for relationships. Unless we rediscover our ability to feel deeply and express feelings clearly, we will never find full life. So when you're dismissive and you've basically shut down your feelings as a coping mechanism, the problem with that is that you can't fully experience life. And the deal is, if you shut your feelings down to prevent you from being hurt, they're not alive to feel the good stuff that God has. So you can't, if we shut down our feelings, we can't really experience life. So in what I call dismissive attachment style, he has another term for it, he calls it survivors. Survivors, again, I'm quoting from the book. Survivors experience and endure pain by defending against the exposure of what's happening in their hearts. Because of deep woundings, they have given up on the truth of their hearts. They resign themselves to pretending that the heart doesn't matter, that feelings, needs, desires, longings, and hope aren't essential for life. In truth, survival living is war against the heart. Even though we're in survival mode, we still hear the heart crying for life. That's a pretty strong statement. So he goes on talking about survivors. The drive for productivity and performance caused many survivors to make their offices at home. Nowhere are we more exposed than at home, where people see us as they really are. Therefore, survivors end up living at our offices to avoid having to face the woundedness at home. So I was, at this point in time, I was in the gym, I was on the rowing machine, listening to this book, and all of a sudden I go, he is speaking right to me. And because if you get your value from performance, especially for us guys, at work, that's where we're good. We may not be so good at home, but by golly, we can get her done at work. And so he goes on, he says, at the office, we attempt to create a place of safety away from home. For survivors, the office can be a place to experience relationship without truly revealing themselves. They hide themselves behind titles, sales goals, to-do lists, profit margins, so that they don't have to be truly known. Without revealing their hearts, they try and establish relationships through intellectual ideas, discussions, and kicking around plans. So you know what? There's nothing wrong with intellectual ideas like politics, like, what's going on and all the problems in the world, or sports. But if we use all of those things we can hide behind those things and never really get to what's going on in our heart. It's really just kind of a front that we put up. And so one more quote here on survivors. Survivors trying to make their homes at the office find peace, serenity, fulfillment, and intimacy at work or in their minds. But in truth, home is where your heart is. We need to go home to the heart before our lives can be full. As survivors, the most important journey we may ever take is the 18 inches from our head to our hearts. So this hit me. It's just like, yeah, that's why it's easier for me to, I own my own business, and it's just easy. And you know what? In my business, I'm the hero. I'm pretty good at it, and I'm comfortable in that world. But I'm not so good, actually, at relationships, which shows up especially at home. And so this guy's like nailing me. He's just going, This is how it is. And honestly, for most men, this is our world. This is like, we're pretty good at the office, and we're not very good at home. And so it's easy to live in the office. So, how do we go on this journey from this 18 inches from our heads to our hearts? And so Chip Dodd, the author of the book, says, okay, so let's talk about how to be practical here. He says there's 3 steps to do this. So step number 1 is to feel what you feel. And so that is about being mindful of what is going on inside of me. And it's just pretty easy to just like ignore that. But basically he's saying take some time and feel what you feel and name it. And then number 2, share it with somebody. And there's something, it's one thing to name it, but it's another thing to actually talk about our feelings. Okay, how is this? And especially if something that's upsetting, there is something powerful about actually communicating that to another person. That, there's this saying, joy shared is doubled and grief shared is halved. And so there's something about talking to other people that is a pretty big deal in processing our emotions. And if we're willing to share, especially our vulnerability with other people, it does significant things in terms of the depth of our relationship with somebody else. So if we want to be closer to people and we really share what's in our hearts and not just our heads, it goes a long ways to building true relationships. And the third thing is about letting it go and giving it to God. And I'm going to talk about a practical way on how to do that some more. So basically, his 3 things is feel what you feel, share it with somebody else, and give it to God. Okay, so here is, if I can get the clicker to work. Hello, clicker. There we go. All right, so if I were to say what is the key quote from this whole book, it would be this. Feelings are the voice of the heart. It's obviously why I named a book that way. And you will not have fullness until you're adept at hearing and experiencing them. When you are not aware of your feelings, your life is lived incompletely. Whenever you don't feel, you are blocked from living life to the fullness. And then this last one really, I think, sums it up. Wherever you lack awareness of your own heart, no room exists for God. That's a pretty strong statement. So, so for those of us who go, feelings are really optional, or they're inconvenient, or that's not me. So basically, here's what happens. We block intimacy with other people, and we block intimacy with God. So maybe what God has done is he's given us emotions so that we have this tool, this resource to help us love other people and love God. So you think about it, what is the greatest and the second greatest commandment? It's to love people and love God. And I just realized halfway through I have handout that I didn't hand out. We'll especially use it later. So if the greatest commandment is to love God and love other people, then maybe emotions are this thing that God's given us to say, okay, here is this resource that helps you do a better job at loving God and loving other people. Okay, so I am going to skip that one. He had, and Andrew talked about this when he talked about the 8 emotions. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them, sadness and gladness. Couple quotes from the book. If you wish to experience life to the fullest, your heart requires that you are willing to feel sadness. So for those of us, Tim was talking about this person that took their lives, and that to me is that's my big emotion, is sadness. Sadness is the feeling that speaks how much you value what is missed, what is gone, what is lost. It also speaks of how deeply you value what you love, what you have, and what you live. So I think that's, to me, Tim, what you were saying is, it made you sad, but it also says life is so precious. And the number one thing for mental illness and depression and anxiety, but really for all of us, is attachment. That is what we want. And if that's what we can give each other, that's huge. And so when we grieve what we've lost, it helps us value what we have. Sorry. My clicker seems to be overly ambitious, but it's probably the operator. We cannot delight deeply in anything or anyone unless we are willing to walk in the world of sadness. Sadness allows the intimacy and impact of love to be much richer because it exposes the heart to its ability to value and honor. So in the book, he's got this 8 emotions, and 7 of them are like loneliness, sadness, guilt, anger. I mean, things that you maybe consider negative, and the last one is gladness. And but it's a paradox, because he said joy, which is what we all want, comes through the willingness to feel pain as we pursue living. We risk living with the potential of pain, or we give up a fulfilling life by committing our lives to survival through self-protection. So that's how I have lived the first 50 years of my life, is self-protection, being a survivor. And then his last quote on gladness is, no one reaches the highest peak of life unless she is willing to fall to the greatest depths. No one can experience deep, heartfelt joy unless he is able and willing to grieve to the core, even having hopes disappointed by not being fulfilled. Gladness, therefore, is only for the courageous, because it requires risking emotional and spiritual pain in the midst of living lives as we are made to live them fully in relationship. So here's the paradox. God created us to have joy by having attachment with other people, but people are our greatest source of pain. Isn't that a big paradox? But if we want to have joy, so here's what he's saying. If we want to have joy and gladness, we have to experience pain. So, well, that's pretty goofy. Why would God create a desire in us and not fulfill it? Or would God even do that? Is there any examples in the Bible of God doing that? Well, here's one. Let's look at Genesis 2. Okay, so this is starting at the beginning. God created Adam, and then the Lord said, it's not good for a man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. So like he's telling this to Adam, like, okay, I gotta make you a helper. What's next? Out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called the living creature was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle and birds of the sky and every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found a helper suitable for him. What's going on here? So God says, hey, Adam, I'm going to give you something. And then he has him do this thing of go through and give names to all the animals. And it's like Adam is anticipating, okay, God said he's going to give me a helper, and I'm going to name each person, even his dog. I don't know how anybody can really be in love with a cat, but I understand that people can be. But here, I just insulted a bunch of people, I'm sure. But no animal was suitable for Adam. So it's like God, what happens after this? Then he gives him Eve. It's just like, oh, this is the helper suitable. So the point is, Adam enjoyed Eve more after he was aware of not having that companion. Isn't that interesting? So this concept of joy sometimes comes after you've not experienced something. That after we've not had it, there's actually a greater enjoyment of having something. So the last quote I'm going to share with you from this book is this one. When we talk about gladness, we're really talking about brokenness and the fulfillment that comes from brokenness. Fulfilled of heart, or blessed are the poor in spirit, because they will become people who face the depth of their hunger to live as fully as emotional and spiritual creatures. So this whole thing about blessed are the poor, isn't this interesting, this quote? Gladness comes from brokenness. Gladness comes from enduring hard things, and it's a package deal. That if we're really going to experience all the wonderful life that God has for us, we have to embrace both suffering and the blessings. And that seems to be God's economy, and why Jesus would start his Sermon on the Mount with this verse. Okay, I want to look at an example of Paul. And I would say Paul, in this passage in 2 Corinthians 1, is this amazing vulnerability, that maybe Paul's biggest vulnerability of the most difficult emotional thing that he ever went through. For we do not want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction which came to us in Asia, that we are burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves. Okay, so first of all, Paul said, I don't want you to be unaware. I want to make it a point to tell you about what has been going on in my life and what was going on in his life, because we'll see from a little bit later in this passage that I don't exactly know what this big deal was, but it was a big deal, and he was sharing it with the Corinthians when he was going through it. Because what we're seeing a little bit is they were praying for him when he was going through this affliction. So Paul didn't hide the fact that he was really going through it. He made it a point to tell others. And he made it a point to tell others not just when he was done, but while he was in the middle of it and asking them to share it with him. So that's a sign of spiritual maturity, is that we voluntarily let others know what's going on with us. And here's how bad it was. We were burdened excessively. I mean, if you think of the weight of a burden, and it's so heavy that you can't take it, beyond our strength. I mean, that to me is being completely overwhelmed. It's like, this is so bad, I can't handle it. And then that led to, we despaired even of life. So in light of our friend that took her life, I can't judge anyone, because Paul himself said, hey, it was so bad for me. I just came to the conclusion, you know what, this is so hard. If I wasn't alive right now, that seems to be a better alternative than living. I mean, that was how difficult it was for him. Now, fortunately, it didn't end there. And we're going to see that. And I mean, I think that's what you're talking about, Tim, that there's been a lot of us that have really struggled, but when we've been in community, we can get some perspective. Okay, then Paul shares with us how he made meaning of what was going on. Like, what's the purpose of this? So he said, so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. So he said, you know what? It was actually good, this thing that happened to me, because it forced me to say, I'm putting my hope in you, God. If you could raise Jesus from the dead, you can help me with this. And he who delivered us from so great a peril of death and will deliver us, he on whom we have set our hope. So the interesting thing is, by going through this difficult thing, Paul increased his hope muscles. He had to put his hope in God, and it actually developed in him this greater depth of being able to build up his confidence in God, because it wasn't in himself. And he will yet deliver us, you also joining, that is present tense, joining in helping us through your prayers, so that thanks may be given by many persons. So Paul didn't just go through this struggle by himself. It wasn't just like, Paul, I'm an apostle, I got this amazing relationship with God, I can do it it's hard, but it's just God and me. That wasn't how it was. He was sharing his life with other people. He felt their support. I have to believe that when he shared it, that he felt heard and understood, and he wasn't feeling alone in this, and that his ability to make meaning out of this, that sharing it with other people was a big part in that, and knowing that they were with him and for him. And even though Paul was in that place where he despairs of life, he got through it. And so it was not just God, it wasn't just with other people, it was both of those things working together. So that's a pretty profound passage. I mean, most of us don't think of Paul as being in such a bad place that he despaired even of life. But he wanted to make sure that we knew about it. Wasn't that a gift that he gave us? So I've been talking to David Crabtree, and he's been involved in this organization called Luke 10, and he said, Jeff, you got to read this book. And Joy Fueled, and Tim, you've been talking about this book, haven't you? And so Luke 10 as an organization, has developed a tool called the check-in. And it's the beauty of this is it's not complicated. Okay, so there's 4 parts to the check-in. Describe what you're feeling. Tell why you feel it. Okay, so remember Chip Dodd's thing, feel what you feel, share it with other people. That's very compatible here in the check-in. And then and this exercise can be done in 2 people. I mean, it can be 2 friends, it can be a husband and wife, it can be a DNA, it can be an MKF. But the idea is everybody does these first 2 things, describe your feeling and why. And you don't have, in a group, really 2 minutes, and I'm going to model this in a minute. I'll give you my check-in. So it's not telling us all the details about everything, but it's just here's what I'm feeling and enough context to understand the why. And then how the exercise goes is you take 5 minutes of quiet and you just ask this question: God, what do you want me to know about this? So, if what we're doing is feeling if you do this exercise, first of all, the self-awareness is, well, what am I feeling? Yeah, that's a good question. Like, most of us don't really stop to know what we're feeling. So that's some value. It's like, okay, well, yeah, what am I feeling? Name it, share with somebody else. And so now, most likely, whatever's like a really big deal in our life is we have just talked about. So now we're asking God, okay, what do you have to say about this? And if hearing from God is kind of something new to you, or it's like, well, I don't know if we can hear God. I mean, it's just, Jesus said, I know my sheep and my sheep hear my voice. So while we're doing this, we ask that God put thoughts in our mind. And if a thought comes to our head, a thing a lot of us ask is, well, is that me or is that God? Well, let's just assume that it's God. And if you have a pen and paper, write down, okay, what are thoughts that are coming to our mind? And then we ask ourselves, well, does that sound like it would be something that God would say? If the thought is, you're scum of the earth, well, that's probably not God. But most likely if we hear something that is God, and then the step 4 of the exercise is, if you're comfortable, and you don't have to do this, but share with other people what you hear. So here's the interesting dynamic about this exercise. First of all, it's good for us because it helps us feel what we're feeling. It's good for us that we further articulate, when we articulate it and share it with others, we start getting some more perspective ourselves, even in the sharing of it. We demonstrate trust because we're sharing it with other people in the group, and that is scary. There's a risk associated with that. But if we're willing to do that, then the bonds between us in the group start strengthening significantly, because we're talking about real stuff, not just intellectual concepts. Then we hear God's perspective, and boy, how helpful is that? And then the 4th step is, as we're sharing it with others, other people get, wow, God spoke to you about that. And I'm inspired by what other people are saying. And then when I share what God told me, that actually helps reinforce in me what I heard, because I'm sharing it. And what happens to me all the time is, even as I'm sharing what I heard, I start even getting more clarity from God as I'm sharing it. So this whole practice can be 10 minutes, start to finish. I mean, it can certainly be, we've been doing this with some groups, and sometimes that's like our whole night, and that's okay for what we've done in our MKF or our leaders meetings, but it can be just a short time. So what we're going to do now as an exercise, finishing this up, we're basically just do this. And so I would suggest getting in a group of three, at least three. And the nice thing about three is that there's more time for everybody to share, but it could be as big as a group of 5. And just go through this exercise. So again, and if you're just going through like a really, really big emotion, maybe this isn't the time. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to share the biggest thing that's going on necessarily, but yeah, if you want to share something, so everybody shares that, 5 minutes. Somebody set their phone timer for 5 minutes, and then when it goes off, then if you want to share. So let me give you an example of a check-in, and I want somebody to time me. Who's got a phone that will time me? Okay. You tell me when I can start. Let's get your phone all set up. Okay. So my check-in is Monday. I heard about my friend that took her life. And it made me very sad. It's not that I knew her really well, but it was somebody that I knew was precious to God, and it made me just sick on the inside. And it also was upsetting to me because my brother, when he was 24, had mental health issues, and he took his life. And so it just like brought up all those memories. And I have other people that I know and love that struggle with mental health issues, and I'm thinking about, gosh, how is this affecting them? And I'm feeling this significant sense of loss and sadness, and I'm also angry because it's like, why wasn't the community there, or why did she give up? But there's a lot of confusion because I know enough about mental illness that it's just, there's no answers. It doesn't defy logic. I mean, you can't just say, well, if we do this, you'll get this option. I mean, so it was upsetting to me, and then there's the guilt thing of the coulda, woulda, shouldas, and could I have done more, or should I, and should I do that with others? On the other hand, what I'd say here is I'm grateful that last week I had the opportunity to process this with several other people, and I'm thankful to belong to a community where we can talk about this and grieve together. So that's my feeling. So how long did that take, Janet? 2:51 left. Oh no, so the check-in, I was trying to do 2 minutes. So I actually did it in 2 minutes and 9 seconds. So sorry, I went 9 over, but that's okay. We don't need to be timing everybody, and if they go over 2 minutes, that's okay. But so I shared quite a bit of my feeling and why, but I basically did it in 2 minutes. All right, so anyway, let's do that. Let's break up, and it's 11:15, and at 11:35, we'll probably start setting up tables for our agape meal. That doesn't mean that you have to quit if you're done, but I wouldn't suggest that you park over here because if you can keep that spot open, then we can start setting up tables in about 20 minutes. So, all right, thank you.